All right, joining us now is Mick Mulroy. He is the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East during Donald Trump's first term, and he joins us now from Whitefish, Montana. Mick, thank you for being on the program. There have been some pretty confusing comments coming out of Washington as of late. One of them came from the Speaker, Mike Johnson, who insisted that the U.S. is not at war. Can you shed some light on why he might have said that?
So, Scott, ultimately, the president has the authority to take unilateral military action if there's an imminent threat. That is why at first you heard all this talk about this concept that the Iranians are close to an ICBM. Turns out from the intelligence community that about 9 years away, so not imminent. Then there was a lot of talk about intelligence that said Iran was going to attack the United States. That turned out to be not accurate. But I do think, to the point of your question, the reason why the speaker is saying it's not a war because he doesn't want to have a vote to essentially declare war. Under Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution, only Congress can declare war. The president can't unilaterally decide that it's a war. And if he doesn't, then he has 60 days before Congress is supposed to authorize the continuation of that confrontation, that conflict. If they do not, that is supposed to be the end of it, and it's supposed to essentially wind down, and the U.S. military is supposed to withdraw under the War Powers Act.
Mick, the Iranians say that they're waiting for a U.S. ground invasion. You know the inner workings of the Trump administration well. Do you think that that's likely?
So there's no way to do a surprise ground invasion. I mean, if you think about the level of force that it was needed to take Iraq back in 2003, about 150,000. Iran itself is 4 times the size of Iraq geographically and 2 times the size of its population plus. So we would see a massive buildup of ground forces. It would obviously have to go to the Middle East, both the Marines and the Army. There'll be no surprise. I don't see that happening. I see zero political interest in getting bogged down in another war. The only thing I can think of would be special operations and potentially the CIA, which may be there already. I don't know, but certainly that's been reporting when it comes to the Iranian Kurds. But I don't see a large ground invasion politically, and we would all see it if it was going to happen.
Mick, I want to ask you about the girls' school that the Iranians say was hit by incoming fire. They say 165 students and staff were killed in southern Iran. The American, some call it the paper of record, the New York Times, their reporting suggests that this was a U.S. strike. There is also Reuters now reporting similar lines. Do you think that this was, in fact, a U.S. strike on this school? And do you think that this was intentional, or do you think that this was bad intelligence?
So absolutely horrible to see any children die in conflict. I cannot imagine it would ever be intentional. There's no reason to do that. Obviously immoral, but also would completely defeat the purposes of trying to liberate the Iranian population from a tyrannical regime. So I don't know if it was actually a U.S. strike. I don't know if it was bad intelligence, or it was an errant missile, or basically could even be an Iranian interceptor missile that just missed the mark and came down on the school. I have no information that that's accurate, but there should be an investigation into what happened. That's the U.S. military has an absolute obligation to find out what went wrong and what was actually the cause, and then ensure, if it was our fault, that it never happens again.
I don't know if we can bring up the live pictures of Beirut right now, but we're monitoring the situation there. There have been these ongoing Israeli strikes, especially on the southern suburbs there. There have been calls from the Lebanese state for the U.S. to intervene, to get Israel to stop striking Lebanon. Obviously, this is creating a humanitarian catastrophe inside the country. There's no indication so far that the Americans are going to do anything. My question for you is, does the United States have the ability to tell Israel, stop it?
Well, that's a very good question. We certainly can tell them to stop it. Well, whether it would actually cause them to stop it is, well, another question. The U.S. was the one that actually pushed Israel to have the ceasefire originally. Once the war started, of course, Israel was concerned about Hezbollah responding to them and basically preemptively started striking their positions. But the U.S., until this war started, made stabilization and the cessation of hostilities a main policy objective, both in Gaza, obviously in Lebanon before this, and in Syria. But now, since the United States launched this war, that seems to have changed pretty abruptly. I don't think that Israel is going to stop, even if the United States were to ask them to. And right now, the United States, I think, is more focused on the war in Iran than anything else.
Pretty remarkable, that relationship, and confusing. I want to ask you about two other things quickly before we let you run. First, the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, has talked about scaling back the need to use sort of more expensive rockets, missiles, things like that. And now that they've have better control over Iranian airspace, they can use these sort of GPS or laser-guided gravity bombs, which obviously require airplanes to be closer to the targets to use those. He insists that there's no issue with U.S. stockpiles of ammunition. Do you believe that that is the case?
Well, generally speaking, how these campaigns go, the initial volley is going to be these expensive guided missiles. They're unmanned. So when you're taking out air and missile defense, when you're taking out the enemy's air force, those are the most effective because you don't lose a lot of pilots. Once you've taken out the air and missile defense in the Air Force, then you gain air superiority and eventually air supremacy. And that is what happened here, so that these pilots can fly freely over around, dropping these other types of bombs, which are much less expensive and we have in much higher supply. That's normal for how these campaigns go. Obviously, the United States wants to preserve its high end when it doesn't need it. It doesn't want to use it. But that is normal how these campaigns would go from the sky, from the air.
All right. Mick Mulroy, we appreciate your expertise. Thank you for joining us here.
Thanks, Steve.